Hello and welcome back. In this unit, we're talking about what sorts of things it is. Is it moral to sell? More specifically, is there anything that it's immoral to sell, right? Or, if the buyer and the seller both voluntarily agree to trade some good or service for money, could that ever be immoral? And first, we're going to focus on bodily organs. So typically, you know, you can get a heart or a kidney from somebody, but typically the person is either dead and they've donated it, or like in the case of a kidney, you can donate it while you're alive. But typically in most countries, if not all countries, it's illegal to sell your kidney to somebody. Um, but legality and morality are not always the same thing, so we're going to consider whether it's actually immoral to sell your body parts. And what this lecture will actually cover two distinct articles. The first one against, and the second one for the ability of people to sell or buy their bodily parts. So the first one by Brecher, the kidney trade, or the customer is always wrong. So in 1989, there was a kidney transplanted in a British hospital, and turns out it was claimed that it was donated by a relative, but in fact it had been bought by a peasant in Turkey. Um, those involved, the transplantee and the donor and the recipient, let's say, um, denied any knowledge of it, right? But there was evidence that it may have been the case, and there's evidence that this practice is relatively widespread. Uh, Apparently, this person had placed some ads in newspapers looking to buy a kidney. Of course, all the local politicians professed condemnation and outrage, but why exactly is an interesting question. We live in a capitalist society and free enterprise is encouraged. So, what's wrong with selling your kidney? I own my own kidney. Can't I do what I want with my kidney? Um, and if I want to sell it, what's wrong with someone buying it from me? Well, let's see, if it's wrong to sell a kidney, it must be either because it's a commercial transaction or because the thing that's being sold is a bodily organ. Well, commercial transactions aren't, considered wrong uh, in and of themselves. So it must be the thing that's being sold, right? The things involved in this transaction, but what makes it wrong? The fact that it's a bodily organ. So Brecker's technique here is to sort of consider some similar cases uh, and try to sort of zone in on what exactly it is that feels so wrong about this. There is sort of a gut instinct to say, yeah, you shouldn't be able to buy and sell organs. Um, he's trying to zone in on exactly what the problem is. So, for example, is it wrong to sell your blood? People do it all the time, right? There doesn't seem to be very much public outrage over it. Uh, so, what's the difference between selling your blood and selling a kidney? Well, there are some differences. For one thing, blood, you can give or sell a pint of blood and it'll grow back, right? It's a renewable resource. Kidneys don't grow back. So if you donate a kidney, you don't get another kidney. From that point on, you're living with one, right? Unless you can buy one from someone else. Um, so you can get by just fine with one kidney, but should that kidney ever fail, then now you're in trouble. Uh, so Brecker compares it, he says it's a little more like removing an eye than just removing some blood, right? You permanently changed your body. But again, it's my body, right? If I want to remove my eye and throw it in the trash, I should be able to. So why not sell it to somebody, right? What's so wrong about removing a body part if that's what I choose to do? So another comparison, and one actually sex work we'll consider in some more detail later. But you might compare selling a kidney to selling sex or selling your labor, right? So many people tend to think that prostitution is wrong because in some way it violates the sex worker's body or their bodily autonomy or something like that. Um, Now you might say, look, you know, the sex worker took the payment expressly on the condition that they would, have sex. Um, so maybe that payment constitutes consent. But in the literature, there's a good deal of controversy over whether consent is even possible in those kinds of situations. Um, Partly because the people that often tend to be in those situations are very much coerced or like don't have a lot of options. Or maybe there's something inherently impossible to consent uh, to those sorts of transactions. Uh, but however land on prostitution, sex work, it's not as controversial as selling kidneys, right? Prostitution is legal in certain countries, and in Las Vegas, um, selling your organs is not legal anywhere, and it seems to elicit more outrage. So, um, why? And you might also consider selling the use of your body to an employer in wage labor. Sorry, if you have a job, in a sense, you're letting the employer use your body to, make coffee or sell shoes or whatever it is that you do, in exchange for money. So, and sometimes those jobs can be damaging to your body and your health as well. If you're working in a coal mine, um, it can kill you. So, jobs that are harmful to you are relatively common, right? Um, Using your body to someone else's ends is quite common. So, what is special about selling a kidney? Um, Brecher has trouble finding, what is the key difference, right, between all these cases. Um, Selling a kidney involves removing a non-essential body part, right? So is the idea that the sex worker and the coal miner aren't making the same kind of sacrifice that a kidney seller would be? Um, I mean, nobody thinks that selling your body for sex or getting black lung from coal mining are good things, but they certainly don't elicit the amount of outrage that kidney sales do. So why? Like, why is kidney sales worse? If we're just talking about the harm involved, I mean, it actually might be less harmful to sell your kidney. It's arguably less psychologically damaging than sex work, and it's not going to kill you the way coal mining could. Um, so, in the end, Brecker comes to the conclusion that selling your organs actually isn't wrong, right? Or at least it's no worse than um, sex work or selling your body to do dangerous work like coal mining and things like that. Um, but he thinks the wrongness comes in with the buying, right? So any kidney sale involves a seller and a buyer. So maybe it's okay to sell your kidneys, but maybe it's wrong to buy a kidney from anyone, and that's what makes people so upset about kidney sales. So we'll explore this. So that's why the title of the article is "The Customer is Always Wrong," right? So even if it's not wrong to sell a kidney, it's always wrong to buy a kidney or any other body part, right? And why? He says it's because it's an exploitation of another human being. It's turning them into a commodity, right? Now, if you may recall from our lecture on deontology, Kant says human beings are sort of have ultimate value. Um, they're the things that sort of bring value into this world. So we place a special premium on humans, and they can't really ever be treated, at least says Kant, like like you would a horse or a car or something like that, right? But if this is the case, right, if the problem with buying a kidney is that you're treating someone as a means to your ends, you're exploiting them, you're not treating them as fully human and turning them into a commodity, then it looks like you'll also have to be opposed to prostitution, and you'll also want to be opposed to other forms of labor that are too damaging to a human being, right? Um, so this is a kind of a rights-based argument, right? It's saying you can't just treat people merely as a means to your ends, and his argument ends up being broader than just kidney sales. He says not only is it wrong to buy a kidney, it's wrong to buy sex, and it's wrong to buy someone's labor when the job they're doing is too damaging or dangerous, right? Um, and doesn't really matter how much you pay them, would argue Brecker. This is a kind of a strict sort of deontological argument, right? It says, look, there are just some things you can't do no matter um, how much you pay. So that was Brecker's argument. So now Taylor is going to argue the other side and say that, well, maybe you should be able to sell your kidneys, right? So his article is called Autonomy, Constraining Options, and Organ Sales. So one reason you might consider letting people sell their organs is because there's not enough to go. Lots of people need organs badly, and there's not enough to save all the lives we could if we had organs available, right? Um, but nonetheless, we tend to say no. Sorry, some people have to die for lack of a kidney, even if someone would be willing to sell it, right? We've decided that this is illegal. Um, in one way or another, often the argument against an organ market is that allowing an organ trade would undermine the autonomy of the sellers. That's roughly what Brecher was saying, right? He's saying you are exploiting the person, you're treating them as a commodity, and humans are special, they deserve autonomy. Um, so Taylor here references another article that I'm not going to make you read by Dworkin. It says actually an organ market would increase the autonomy of the sellers, right? And Taylor is going to defend that line of argument against some objections, right? So this is something you could do in your paper as well. Um, just defend another author against objections. So Dworkin's argument is this. He says, if you give a person more options for what they can do with their body, you're giving them more autonomy over their body, right? So, if someone has someone's missing a leg and then you give them a prosthetic leg, you've just increased their autonomy. You've given them more things they can do now with their body. They can now run, right? Um, so obviously, this argument, when applied to bodily organs, should only apply to things that don't kill you, right? So your autonomy can't be increased by becoming dead, right? So, renewable bodily substances like blood or organs that can be removed without compromising your health, for example, one kidney. Um, so selling your liver would reduce your autonomy because then you'd either be um, stuck on a machine or you'd be dead, right? So according to Dworkin, increasing your sphere of control increases your autonomy. And having the ability to sell your organs increases your sphere of control because it removes prohibition over what you can do with your own body, right? Now there's a new thing you can do with your own body, and that's what autonomy is all about, using your body, right, to accomplish your goals. So, yeah, that argument feels pretty straightforward, and Brecker considered a version of it, which is like, why not? It's your body. Why not, sell parts of it if you want? So there are a lot of objections, and most of the argument lies in addressing these objections, right? So one objection is that um, poorer people might be forced by economic necessity to sell their organs, and that actually reduces your autonomy when you're forced to do things with your body that you wouldn't do otherwise, right? Well, Dworkin doesn't buy this. He says if you accept that line of reasoning, um, then you should probably also prohibit poor people from joining the army, right? Taking jobs like working in a coal mine. Now, Brecker kind of bites the bullet on that one and says, yeah, you shouldn't hire someone to work in a coal mine if it's dangerous. Um, but Dworkin says then you'd have to outlaw, participating in medical experiments for money. At any rate, the general point is he thinks you shouldn't go around telling people what they can and can't do to make money, right? That's up to them, even if they're poor, right? Just because you're poor doesn't mean that someone has to step in and tell you what you can do, right? Um, what should be done, right, to prevent exploitation of the poor is to pass laws that make sure that, for example, coal mining is done safely. Now, I don't know about the army example. I don't know how you make joining the army perfectly safe, right? Um, but at any rate, Dworkin imagines, or Taylor imagines on Dworkin's behalf, um, that you could do something similar with the organ market, right? You could make the kidney removal as safe as possible in a hospital, and then according to Dworkin, it wouldn't be exploitative of the poor. Right? So here he's arguing, well, an organ market is fine so long as it's regulated, right? What we don't want is some sort of back alley free market organ market. So another author, Zutlevich, also objects to Dworkin. He says, look, the difference between coal mining with safety standards and organ sale is that coal mining, if it was safe and well paid, would also be attractive to the non-poor, right? If you could coming out of college, if you could make good money coal mining and you didn't have to worry about black lung, maybe even the college educated, right, and the people who might be an interesting alternative to like accounting, right? You get some exercise and so on. So Sulovich says the difference between that, well-regulated coal mining and well-regulated organ sales is that even if the market were well-regulated and the transplant were safe, um, people still probably wouldn't choose to do it unless they were pretty desperate, right? It's sort of the last thing on your list you think you'd do before you start selling your kidneys, right? Um, and something you only do because you're desperate is not something that enhances your autonomy, right? A fair point. Well, Taylor responds to this objection. He says, well, all that depends really on how much you're selling these kidneys for, right? If you could have a safe operation and you could get $5 million for that kidney, and now, you're, you're set for like a much, better life, right? For the rest of your life, maybe people will be considering it, even if they're not super desperate, right? Um, so anyways, that's Taylor's response. There's no difference in principle. It's just, it's the price, really. So another author, Hughes, also objects to organ sales, saying, look, giving a person more options doesn't always enhance their autonomy. In fact, sometimes having more options can actually reduce your autonomy. For example, if you give, say, a woman who's being abused by her husband, right? And you say, look, do you want to press charges on your husband or not? Well, giving her that choice actually reduced her autonomy because the fear of retaliation from her husband often will cause her not to press charges, right? When she doesn't press charges, then she's stuck in that same situation. If she wasn't given the option, right, if the cops just came and said, sorry, we're taking your husband away, that would actually enhance her autonomy, right? So in this case, having a choice reduces your autonomy. So he calls that a constraining option, right? Having an option that actually reduces your autonomy. And so Hughes says that the options to sell your organ is actually a constraining option. And having that option actually reduces your autonomy because you can imagine all sorts of circumstances where someone might be coerced into selling their organs, where maybe they wouldn't have been if it were illegal, right? Um, what you could have your parents trying to convince you to sell your organ, right, or your spouse or someone else that you owe money to or something like that. If it had just been illegal, then you'd still be in a bad situation, but at least you wouldn't be. You'd have keep your kidney, right, instead of having somebody basically force you, coerce you into selling it. So, is that the case? Is having the option to sell your organs actually a constraining option that actually makes things worse and reduces your autonomy? Um, so Taylor says, look, Hughes' objection assumes that there will be poor people who will be forced into organ sales, and that's what makes it bad, right? Um, but does it have to be that way, right? Uh, does allowing people to sell their organs, does that mean for sure that the poor will be exploited, or does it presuppose or reinforce the autonomy undermining the situation in the same way as the option not to press charges, right? Hughes argues no, this is not the same situation as having the option to not press charges on your abuser. Says the option to sell your organs doesn't create that same sort of trap because the price might be enough to help you out of poverty, right? And even if it isn't, um, the alternative is just to be more poor, right? So again, for the victim of abuse, their life would be better if they lacked the options to not press charges. But the organ seller's life isn't going to be any better for lacking that option. Right? Now, is it clear here? I don't know. ask you, did Taylor really respond to Hugh's question? And maybe Hughes didn't flesh it out well enough, but I think he may be imagining, a situation where, yeah, someone is coercing you into selling your organ, right? Um, and maybe coercing you into giving them the money or not keeping enough of the money or whatever. Like there's all kinds of terrible situations that people could be forced into. It's not guaranteed that selling your organs will make you rich, right? Again, if you're in a coercive situation, it might just make you worse off. But so Hughes really seems to think that there's going to be a high price on these organs, and that's going to solve a lot of these problems. But I'm not totally convinced, I guess. Sorry. I mean, Taylor seems to think this. So again, Zutovich, right? He argues that if we allowed the poor to benefit economically from selling their organs, this would make the general will to help the poor um, sort of feel less urgent, and people would sort of say, well, if you're so poor, if you're just sell your organs, right? He's worried this will become the new way to lift yourself out of poverty, right? Is just sell your kidneys, right? Um, for various reasons, right? It'll make the poor less poor, but the rich are going to want these organs to keep coming, right? If they can get them, obviously this isn't an argument against the poor selling their organs to the poor or the rich selling them to the rich, right? Um, but it's a potential worry, right? Of course, Dworkin says, look, we can legislate around all these problems, right? We can make sure that the situation is safe, right? Um, we could somehow, make it illegal to sell your organs if you're too poor. But he says, but doesn't that just sound like discrimination against the poor, right? Like all of these situations, like, well, it's gonna be mostly poor people selling their organs, and they can't be trusted to make autonomous decisions because they have all these pressures on them. I mean, sure, they have all these pressures on them, but does that mean that they're not allowed to make autonomous decisions? And at any rate, Dworkin and Taylor say, no, they should be able to choose, right? So again, Taylor also thinks Zutlovich is catastrophizing a little bit. Is it really the case that if the poor were able to sell their organs, that people would just stop, we just stop providing welfare and other sorts of aid, right? And just say, okay, now your only way out of poverty is to sell your organs. Um, there's not really any evidence that that's the way it happens with these large scale aid programs, right? Um, and anyway, so the richer countries seem eager to outlaw the organ trade, not encourage it. So maybe Zutlovich has a little bit of a slippery slope argument here that's not very plausible, right? Is allowing poor to sell their organs really going to mean that then that's all aid is going to stop and all welfare is going to stop? I don't know. It's an empirical question, right? I'll leave it up to you what you think. Okay, so that's our discussion on organ sales. We saw one argument against it, or at least against buying organs, and then we saw a, a few. We jumped into this conversation with Hughes. Sorry, Taylor. I keep calling him Hughes. Um, Responding to a few different objections to the notion that hey, if I can do more with my body, then great. I've expanded my autonomy. There are obviously a few uh, reasonable objections to it, and Taylor thinks he's responded to all of those. But again, you're free to disagree with Taylor or think he got it wrong, and possibly write a paper on it. So, all right, we will pick up next time.